Welcome to our tutorial video for Aquarelle Painter. If you've seen any of our PhotographyBB Photoshop actions before, then you'll know just how much I love turning photographs into digital artwork. But along with that comes the challenge of creating new artistic effects with the Photoshop action. After all, there's only so many ways you can digitally paint a photograph. So when searching for inspiration for new effects, this one came to me in the most unlikely of places, which was during my search for new music and movies. I love watching music documentaries of various musical artists, and while browsing the iTunes store, I recently came across a very interesting movie poster for a documentary called Songwriter about the musical artist Ed Sheeran. I noticed this interesting paper texture on the poster image, coupled with two distinct paint stroke colors, the blue and the green, and a rough outline of Ed Sheeran's features here in black, almost like a charcoal sketch. So after seeing this poster, I thought to myself, this should be a Photoshop effect, in one click of course, and hence this new Aquarelle Painter action was born. So let's dive in and take a look at how it works, along with some of the optional customizations you can make after running this action on your photographs. So the first step is to open up an image that we want to turn into an Aquarelle painting here. And next, open up the Aquarelle Painter Action Group and click on Step 1 Select Focus and click Play at the bottom of your Actions panel. Now this dialog box will pop up instructing you to use a soft or hard brush to paint over your main subject on the main focus area layer, effectively creating a selection of your main subject. So let's click Stop to do this now. And before we start brushing, it's very important to make sure that your brush tool opacity and flow, up here at the top, are both set to 100%, or the action will pop up with several errors throughout. So let's set those to 100% if they're not already. Okay, now let's close the Actions panel out of the way for step 1 and start painting over our main subject. Now, one of the great things about this action is that your selection can be pretty loose and it doesn't need to be exact, so that makes this even easier to work with. And the size of the brush tool, of course, can be adjusted by pressing the square bracket keys to either increase or decrease the size. And all we do now is paint wherever we want to select our main subject. And of course, if we make any mistakes, you can switch to the eraser tool to erase any of the brushing and then rebrush over again if necessary. Okay, so great, this looks good. We'll start with this. So now once we have the main subject selected, or painted over in this case, on the main focus area, open up your Actions panel again and click on Step 2, Run Aquarelle Painter, and click Play at the bottom of the Actions panel. Now, depending on the speed and specifications of your computer, this action may take a few minutes to complete. Okay, super. The action is complete and we can close this dialog box here. And let's also close the Actions panel out of the way here, like this. Okay. So this is already a pretty good representation of the vision that I had for an effect when I was creating this action. It takes the inspiration from that Songwriter movie poster, and I've tried to make it my own a little bit here. So you can see we have some nice paper texture with a subtle watercolor-like effect going on here. We have the black charcoal-like sketch effect, and some other paint elements going on here. Now, for the most part, everything here is customizable, so let's dive into the Layers palette and see what optional refinements are available. Now, if you're running Photoshop CS6, you may notice that your layer group folders like these are all open and the Layers palette can look quite overwhelming. So what we'll do is hold down the Option and Command keys if you're on a Mac, or the Alt and Control keys if you're on a PC, and while holding those keys down, click on the Layer Group toggle arrow to collapse all groups to make things more tidy and more viewable. Okay, so let's look at the first group here, the Main Subject Controls group. So if we toggle this open, you can see we have some layers in here to work with. Now the first group contains the white highlight lines, and these are just little subtle details in the effect to give it more of a sketched or painted feel. Now you can toggle the visibility of these on or off using the visibility icon here in the layers palette, or you can just adjust the opacity of this layer to increase or decrease the effect if you like. Now next we have the subject details layer, and this one here just enhances some of the smaller details in the artwork. These would be things more like hair or eyelashes or textures like in the beard here, or any finer details that may have been present in your original image. So play around again with the visibility and or the layer opacity to your liking here with this one. Now the next layer can be fun to work with. So occasionally you may wish to restore a slight bit of realism back into your artwork in certain areas of your image. And you can use this layer to bring back a bit of the original subject. So here we'll click on the black layer mask of this layer to make the layer mask active, and press D on the keyboard to switch our brush swatches to their masking defaults, where white is the foreground color. And all we do is paint over the image onto our mask using the white brush. And this is going to restore some of the original subject back into the image. Now, if it's too much, you can lower the opacity of the brush or the layer itself. And if you want to remove any parts that you've painted white, you can just press X on the keyboard to exchange the swatches around and just paint with black over those areas to hide the original subject in those areas. So just remember, white reveals the subject and black conceals the subject. This step can alter the original effect a lot, so have fun with it, and I would recommend using it sparingly if you want to keep the original look intact. So now we can close up this layer group and toggle open our next one, which is called Paint 1. So inside here, we have a color fill layer, which is clipped to a whole subfolder of Paint 1 color layers here. Now you'll notice this layer is also not visible. So before we explore what you can do here, let's toggle open these Paint 1 color layers first. So inside here, we have a few layers, and I've tried to name them based on which parts of the paint effects that they're controlling. So we have some drips layers here, splashes here, wider spreads of paint on this layer, and details on this layer. Now you can control the visibility and or the opacity for each one of these layers to control their various strengths over the main subject. So let me back up for a moment and just note the way that these layers are ordered in the layers palette here. So the main subject control group above controls those little highlight details that we just looked at and allows us to bring back or restore the original main subject over top of the painted effect. Now this next Paint 1 group adds some painted elements on top of the black charcoal sketch effect here, as inspired by the look of the songwriter poster. And then under these Paint 1 areas, we have the dark sketch lines, then followed by the Paint 2 color, which is going to appear underneath the dark painted sketch lines there. And lastly, the base of the image is the paper background and all of the colors and textures that belong to that group. Okay, so let's jump back up here now to the Paint 1 layer group. And again, we have this color swatch here that is clipped to the Paint Color 1 layers subgroup. And inside here, we have the different paint layers that make up this green tone paint group, including the drips, splashes, wider paint spread, and the paint that appears over top of the detailed areas in the main subject. Now, all of these can be toggled on or off individually, and again, we can adjust the opacity if they're too strong. But also, you're going to notice this little layer effects toggle here, and this is where I've set the paint color for each of these layers. So you could actually toggle these open and double click on the color overlay layer style for any of these layers. Click on the color swatch here and change just that one layer color to another similar tone or even something completely different. So if I change the color overlay swatch on this drips layer to something dramatically different, like a bright purple, let's say, like this. Okay, there. Now if I click OK and OK again, now you can see how the drip areas of the paint effects are now purple. But let's say that you want to keep the integrity of this effect intact, but you would prefer to change all of the green paint layers to purple instead of doing them one by one like that. So this is where we can go back up to that little color fill layer here and turn on the visibility. And now everything is back to the green tone. But if I double click the swatch here in the layers palette, and let's pick something kind of like a pastel red, like here. And you want to try and keep this tone in the middle with some grays mixed in for the best effect here. But of course, every image is different, and feel free to push the boundaries, go a bit wild if you want to. But I'm going to go with this pastel red, so I'll click OK to accept this, and done. So we've just changed all of the green painted areas to this new pastel red tone. So I can close up this layer group, and we can open up the sketch lines group here. And inside we have 3 different types of sketch lines in here. So the first group controls the wiggly sketch lines. The next is the heavy sketch lines. And the last are the black detailed areas here. And of course, if you would like to remove or reduce the effect of any of these layers, you can simply toggle the visibility on or off, or reduce the opacity to your liking. So I'll toggle this group back closed again. And our next group are the Paint 2 colors. In this case, they're the default blue paint colors. And this group works similarly to the Paint 1 group, with a different paint layer subgroup here that contains the different paint strokes and drips. And again, you can change each of the layer effects color overlays individually, but the easiest way, of course, is to use the Paint 2 color layer swatch here. So if I turn on the visibility of this layer and double click that color swatch, and I'm going to change this one just a little bit and maybe go with a bright baby blue. Let's see here. Yeah, that looks cool. And we'll click OK. Super. Okay, so you can play with these for different looks and really push the limits creatively with how you want your final artwork to look like. So let's close up this group and open up the last one here, the paper background. Okay, so inside this group, we have all of the elements that make up this paper background, and there's a few in here that you can really have some fun with. And the first is this wrinkle texture on the paper. So if I toggle that on and off, you can see that part of the texture in the image. Now, I've set the default opacity so that everything comes together in a very subtle way, but feel free to increase or decrease the opacity on any of these layers to play with the strength of these textures. And next, we have the Paper Background Paint 2 and Paint, which should actually be Paint 1. But, we have 2 colors here, giving us the same 2 original tones of blue and green that were in the background paper also. So you can toggle these on or off and adjust their opacities. And again, you can see there's a little layer effects toggle here. So open that up and double click the color overlay swatch. And then you can change the color of these layers too if you would like. Okay, and next we have the paper edge texture here. And if I increase the opacity of this layer, you can see how the background is affected here. Now, it may look great to increase the opacity for some image, but I really built this one to be subtle, so leave it back down around 10% if you want it to blend in nicely with the paper texture. And now this layer controls the uniform texture of the paper, which gives it a bit of noise or grit in the background. And again, you can experiment with the opacity or the visibility depending on your image. And lastly here, we have the paper color. So our default color is white, but let's go wild and double click that swatch and change the paper color. And let's go with a very light and subtle baby blue tone here. So I like that one for this image. Okay, click OK. And there we have it. Our Aquarelle Painter image is complete. This one is a bit of a different effect, of course, that mixes a touch of watercolor with a sketch-like feeling for the subject. So I hope you have a lot of fun using this on a wide variety of photographs. I look forward to seeing what you guys can create with this action. So thank you again for checking out our PhotographyBB Artistry 3 Aquarelle Painter action. Happy photoshopping!